The new spin dryer. The hum began subtly, a low, throbbing vibration that seemed to pulse through the floorboards. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but quickly grew more insistent, as if a hidden force was quietly asserting its presence. In Mrs. Gable's home, she looked down at the gleaming new spin dryer with mixed feelings of pride and trepidation. A replacement for the ancient, rickety dryer she had been using for years, it was supposed to bring convenience and ease to her otherwise meticulous life. Stainless steel polished to perfection, the dryer promised high efficiency and comfort. Mrs. Gable, a widow in her late 60s, prided herself on the small rituals of home care that had been passed down to her. Tidiness was the one thing that made her feel secure in the absence of her late husband, whose memory lingered in every corner of the house. The dryer had arrived that morning, and Mrs. Gable had been excited to try it out, imagining how crisp and fresh her laundry would be after just one cycle. Her excitement, however, was short-lived. The first load, simply a mountain of white sheets, tumbled into the drum. The hum began as the machine powered up. At first, it was like any normal appliance starting to work, but then it wasn't. The hum deepened, becoming a constant undercurrent of energy that vibrated through the walls. As the dryer spun, it rattled the kitchen windows. Mrs. Gable leaned against the doorframe, her brow furrowing at the noise. She had never heard a machine like this. It seemed too alive. When the cycle finished, the hum did not fade. Instead, it persisted, a low throbbing pulse that vibrated under the floorboards, sinking into her bones. Puzzled, Mrs. Gable tried to turn it off. She flicked the off switch. She set the timer. She even tried the circuit breaker, but nothing worked. The dryer hummed louder, seemingly growing more insistent. Finally, after several failed attempts to silence it, she had no choice but to yank the plug from the wall. The moment it stopped, Mrs. Gable took a deep breath. Something was off, but she couldn't place it. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought she heard the hum again, faint but undeniable. It was as if it lingered in the house, wrapping itself around her like a heavy blanket. She dismissed it as imagination until the next day. It happened again. The hum returned, persistent, undisturbed by any action she took to quell it. Days passed, and Mrs. Gable found herself growing more and more restless. She hadn't slept well in over a week. Even when the dryer was unplugged, she could hear the hum faintly. It throbbed through the walls of the house almost like a heartbeat. Every night she lay awake, the sound echoing in the stillness, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was in the house with her. Something watching. Desperate, she returned to the appliance emporium, the store where she had purchased the dryer just days ago. But when she arrived, the shop was completely different. The door was locked, the lights off. The sign above the entrance hung crooked and faded. She squinted up at it, reading "Closed for renovations." A weathered placard swung loosely in the wind, but renovations. She had just been there a few days ago, had spoken to the salesman, had shaken his hand. Where had they gone? That night, after pacing restlessly through the house, Mrs. Gable stood before the dryer, overcome by an inexplicable urge. It was as though something within her was compelling her to load it, to feed it. Without understanding why, she grabbed a single sock and tossed it inside the machine. The hum began again, this time with a deep, unsettling resonance. It was no longer a hum, it was a presence. The air grew colder as the machine began to spin. She waited and waited. Then, as the cycle finished, the hum did not die down. It grew louder, and through the thick glass door she saw it. The shadow was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but then it grew. A figure formed, vague and shifting, its outline humanoid but unnatural, like something struggling to take shape. Mrs. Gable recoiled, her heart thundering in her chest. She reached for the plug, but before she could pull it, the figure moved closer, pressing against the glass like a trapped soul longing to escape. Her breath hitched. Night after night, she returned to the dryer. Each time, the presence grew. She added more items, trinkets, jewelry, old photographs, and with each load, the shape inside the dryer became clearer, its features sharper, more menacing. The machine's hum became a roar, drowning out everything around her. It was no longer just a sound. It was a siren call pulling her deeper into the unknown.